And without further ado, Neal Graffy. Thank you to Neal for being here. Neal is a local Santa Barbara historian. He has authored numerous books and texts for historical organizations, as well as articles in regional and national publications. He has written 3 books: Historic Santa Barbara Then and Now, and Santa Barbara Street Names, which is on sale in the museum's store. He's co-authored 2 books in a series of Santa Barbara history mysteries: A Murder at the Potter Hotel and An Unfortunate Incident at Castle Rock. And he's currently working on the Great Santa Barbara Earthquake of 1925, the disaster that built the city. Neal has served as a board member for the Historical Museum, a member and chairman of the Santa Barbara County Landmarks Commission, board member of the Santa Barbara Mission Canyon Association, sheriff of the Santa Barbara Corral of Westerners, and is a founding member of the De La Guerra y Pacheco chapter, 1.5 of the Ancient and Honorable Order of E Clampus Vitas. So Neal knows a lot, and we're happy that he's here today. He's a good friend and a great historian. So without further ado, Neal Graffy.
All right, thank you, Emily. Thank you, everybody, for coming today. And our story is called The Almost True Story of Fremont, Foxen, and the San Marcos Pass. I also now have changed it to the pass because we've got the Gaviota Pass, the Refugio Pass, and the San Marcos Pass. We've got a lot of passes involved here. So our story is going to start off that there is a plaque at the northbound rest stop exit at the Gaviota Pass, and erected in 1937. It reads, "Gaviota Pass, Fremont Foxen Memorial. Here on Christmas Day, 1846, natives and soldiers from the Presidio of Santa Barbara lay in ambush for Lieutenant Colonel John C. Fremont, USA, and his battalion. Advised of the plot, Fremont was guided by Benjamin Foxen and his son William, and captured Santa Barbara without bloodshed." This was erected in May of 1937, and among all the Foxen and Fremont relatives, we also had the star Leo Carrillo was there to help dedicate this plaque. At the top of San Marcos Pass on the old Kinnebon Road, there was another plaque. It fell down in a storm a few years back, but this plaque, and it's mounted on a 15-ton boulder that was brought to the site by Santa Barbara Supervisor Sam Stanwood back when he could have county workers move things off of his property and put it someplace else. And on this plaque it says, "In honor of Lieutenant Colonel John C. Fremont, soldiers and guide W.B. Foxen, who marched over the San Marcos Pass December 25th, 1846, and took possession of Santa Barbara while the Californians waited for them in ambush at the Gaviota Pass. The Santa Barbara Chapter, Daughters of the American Revolution, 1926. And then on Foxen Canyon Road on the former Foxen Rancho, yet another plaque. This one not as large as the other one. Unfortunately, the people that did this could only get a 6.5-ton rock rather than a 15-ton rock. And this one reads, "Santa Barbara County dedicates this monument to John C. Fremont. Near this site on the Foxen Rancho in 1846 encamped an American force under Lieutenant Colonel Fremont. Warned by Foxen of an ambush in Gaviota Pass and guided by him on Christmas Day over the San Marcos Pass, the Americans took Santa Barbara without bloodshed. 3 weeks later, January 13th, 1847, California was ceded to the United States. This is erected by the pioneer section of the Minerva Library Club, Susan E. Lincoln, whose name got more coverage than Fremont or Foxen. And the Minerva Society, she was the goddess of wisdom, so this was a ladies' society. Now, it's dated 1926, but they didn't get it mounted until September of 1929. So, oh, and then there's one more slide here. This almost looks like a gravestone. This is on a boulder at the site of the Foxen Adobe down in Foxen Canyon Road, and it just simply reads, Benjamin Foxen Adobe Site, 1837, Santa Barbara County Landmark, number 7, January 29th, 1979. So this here in 4 slides is pretty much what most people know about John C. Fremont and Benjamin Foxen. So how do we separate legend from fact and find out what really happened in December of 1846? Members of the Foxen family aren't even in agreement. It was Benjamin, it was his son William, it was the both of them. Other sources say it was neither of them, it never happened. It was a Foxen Rancho employee, or it was a man named Romero. So there was another story that I found interesting enough. Well, other sources, anyway, there's also personal reminiscence recorded years after the event, and then there's a family legend. And as the generations pass, the stories get more and more colorful. And so all of this led me to the conclusion that generally behind every legend, there's a problem. So I had several goals when I started off to do this talk. To find the earliest account of Fremont actually guiding, or Foxen actually guiding Fremont somewhere, the earliest account of the ambush waiting for Fremont at Gaviota, and why did Fremont decide to take the San Marcos Pass? So to get the story straight, I had to throw out, like I do with a lot of my histories, I throw out everything I've read, everything somebody else has written, and go back to the actual dates and try to find the straightest stories. And so I found credible guides to help me through this event, and they were the men in Fremont's battalion. The first gentleman was Edwin Bryant. He was 41 years old, and he wrote a book called What I Saw in California, and it is one of the most delightful books on the pre-gold rush crossing of the plains to come to California. And in California, he writes about the war in California and the aftermath of that. His story is very detailed. It's really fun to read. And Bryant also later became, in 1847, the alcalde, or the mayor of San Francisco, and Bryant Street in San Francisco is named for him. My next gentleman was Lewis T. McLean. He was 27 years old. He was a Navy man, and as a result, his memoirs of the events are just very straight and forward. Took the cannon 2.3 miles, camped, ate lunch, moved on. So he's just very factual and to the point, but he gives a lot of great information. Our next gentleman was Theodore Talbot. He's 21 years old, and he had joined Fremont in St. Louis as they were gathering to do what we'll call his third expedition, as coming across to lay the trails and find trails to get to California, to the Pacific Ocean. We'll find out more about that later. So Talbot's information we get from him because of the letters that he wrote to his mother and his sister. And so they're very personal, very informative. He doesn't sugarcoat things, even though he's writing to his mom, so not to worry, but he's doing some dangerous stuff and he writes about it. So another great contact. And finally, we have this gentleman, Edward Kemble. Edward Kemble was just 18 years old. He'd come to California in 1846 with the legendary Sam Brannan, from whom we have Brannan Street in San Francisco, and a lot of great stories there. So he came just in time to take part of this conquest of California. He would go on to be the editor and proprietor of several San Francisco's first newspapers, and his writing reflects the skill of an accomplished observer. Now, there are no newspapers, so this is pretty much the guys that I dealt with, and we had a lot of fun. So where do we start? So I decided to start here and with a good bottle of Pinot and work my way back. So Benjamin Foxen, the sailor. Benjamin Foxen was born William Benjamin Foxen, and he was born in Norwich, England in 1796. And Norwich is about 90 miles northeast of London and about 15 miles in from the English Channel. So it's not exactly your textbook seaport city where young Benjamin saw ships coming in, but something about the sea called to him, and he joined the British Navy. Following his stint there, he was in the British Merchant Marine, and then at age 21, he left the service and traveled across the Atlantic, went around the tip of South America, and came up into California. Various journals and various stories put him in Mexico, California, the Sandwich Islands, doing trading and moving about. And finally, he came into Santa Barbara. Foxen, the boat builder. Foxen credits himself as being the man who built the first boat in Santa Barbara and launched it. There's about a half dozen other people who take that credit, and there's about a half dozen ships that also take the name of that. Some of them were wrecked and rebuilt, some of them were built from scratch, but all the other ships that were built, none of them say that Foxen was not involved with it. So one way or another, the ships that got launched in Santa Barbara, Foxen either built them or had a hand in building them. And one of the anecdotes about Foxen is that when they had the ship, it was out at the Goleta Sandpoint, and the ship is up there in the cradle, and everybody's wondering, well, how the heck are you going to get this boat down to the water? The ship is up here, the water's down there. And he told everybody, bring all of your oxen out on Saturday, we're going to launch the boat. So all his friends and neighbors brought their oxen out to pull the boat into the water. And as they all came up and were waiting, he walked up to the cradle, knocked out the blocks, and the well-greased ramp, the ship just slid down and into the water. And accordingly, everybody thought that was really funny. They brought their oxen all the way from Santa Barbara, a day and a half trip, and he just slid the boat into the water. I would have kicked his ass personally, but everybody thought it was great fun, and it kind of gives you an idea of the humor of this gentleman. A less colorful story simply says that they dug a large pit in the sand and waited for the high tide to come out and float the ship out. But since that's not a fun story, I dismiss it completely, so out of there. Benjamin Foxen, the pioneer of Santa Barbara. Family legend had it that Foxen first spied his future bride when he was up at Don Thomas Oliveira's ranch, the San Isidro, up in Montecito, and he was there to do business. He was bartering for hides and getting things for his store when he spied the lovely stepdaughter of Don Tomas, and the salt water, seawater, drained from his veins, and he became a landlubber at that point. And he opened a little store in Santa Barbara, and also opened a place along the beachfront. And they courted each other. Now, one of the things that he had to do, of course, was to become a Catholic. He also had to learn Spanish, become a Mexican citizen, and become a Catholic. And with the hormones raging in a young man of 25, 26, he accomplished all those things in record time and was able to marry the lovely Eduarda at Mission Santa Barbara. Now, they were married on May 8th, 1831, and at the Mission Santa Barbara. And being newlyweds, it's of course reasonable that Don Julian had certain expectancies, apparently not shared by his new wife. According to the Foxen's granddaughter, just about a week after they were married, she came up to the San Isidro Ranch and said to her mother, "I don't know what to do. Don Julian wants me to do things with him of which I know nothing." And she was frightened. And her mother soothed her and said, "He is your husband. It's all right. Let him have his way." Well, without benefit of the state-mandated sex education, training films, or the internet, they somehow figured it out because between the two of them, they produced 18 children. Now, on the day that he was married, or within a couple-day period of his marriage to her, his first child was born. And it was not by his wife, it was by a woman in Santa Barbara named Marie Stewart, who is an absolute colorful character. And the conception of that particular child may have happened in the adobe right behind us over there, known as the historic adobe. I'll have a talk eventually about Marie Stewart, because she and her mom and this whole family thing is stunning. But nevertheless, so here we are, we're leaving them with children, and on we go. They then, Foxen had a little adobe at the beachfront on Burton's Mound where he opened the store for a while. But then he decided that he wanted to be a ranchero. And if you look on this little map here, and if I do my coloring crayons correctly, here we go. I did it wrong. Don't look. Well, you can see Foxen up there near the center of the top of the screen. So he bought a ranch up there, the Tinnaquack Ranch. And Tinnaquack is an Indian word said to mean little stream. And I note that there's a nearby rancho just below the college ranch called Take-a-Piss, meaning in the Chumash word exactly that. So I wonder if Little Stream and Take-a-Piss are related. Historians have debated that for years. So on the ranch in 1837, he builds an adobe. And how remote was this place that as they're building the adobe, they are threatened by grizzly bears. And so they have to sleep up in the rafters or up on the roof until they finish the house. So it was a pretty remote place. But they also made sure that there was at least a decent trail or a road leading past this place, which became Foxen Canyon Road, so that people could come by and barter and trade with the many things that they raised on their ranch. So we're going to leave the Foxens as they continue to produce more children on their ranch, and we'll meet John C. Fremont. Fremont was born in 1813 in Savannah, Georgia. He joined the U.S. Army and it was then taken into the U.S. Topographical Corps to map the places around America. As a very young man, he met this girl to the right, Jessie Benton. Jessie Benton was the daughter of probably the most powerful senator in America, Senator Thomas Hart Benton of Missouri. Mr. Benton's daughter was drop-dead gorgeous, highly educated, and he expected her to marry somebody that would eventually probably go into politics, head it to the Senate, and possibly be the next president of the United States. He was not looking for a lieutenant in the Topographical Corps to take his daughter's hand. And despite his objections, though, love conquered all, and 17-year-old Jessie Benton married 28-year-old John C. Fremont. Well, perhaps it's through the connections of his father-in-law that he started to get jobs doing great expeditions across America to map the new frontier that was coming up. One of the gentlemen he met in 1842 was a guy named Christopher Houston Carson, best known as Kit Carson. And so Kit Carson joined Fremont for the first expedition to explore and map the West and the Pacific Northwest. Well, behind every successful man, it is said there is a woman, and in this case, there certainly was. Jessie Benton Fremont really took care of her husband. The reports that he did from his expeditions that he published for Congress were from the Topographical Corps. They were just went here, saw that, too many miles, this many Indians, this whatever. So that's all that was recorded. She took his notes, wrote them out, made them far more colorful, and with these going into these dangerous and unknown territories. And so Fremont starts to become a hero. It's Fremont meeting with the Indians, not only speaking with them and sitting down to eat with them, but they joined him. They became part of his team as he crossed the United States. And some of them became his personal guard. It's Fremont planting the American flag up at the top of the Rocky Mountains, and always the breeze is blowing, the flag is unfurling. Fremont was a national hero, and it's all thanks to Jessie Benton Fremont, who pushed it and made it happen. So we'll leave Fremont wandering in the mountains for a second and return to California. California, 1845, things are not looking good. At the left, we have Governor Manuel Mitchell-Terena. We have a street for Mr. Mitchell-Terena. He was our latest governor, appointed from Mexico. He was here from 1842 to 1845, and he was overthrown by the gentleman in the second. The second picture, that's Pio Pico. He was our governor from 1832. And to his side is General Jose Castro, who was also a governor of California, 1835 to 1836. Well, the Californians were tired of these governors being political appointees from Mexico, and they wanted native sons to be the governors. And so Mitchell-Terena was overthrown and tossed out. And I might note that Pio Pico had done the same with Governors Alvarado and Castro in overthrowing Governor Manuel Victoria, street name Kaching. And so now they have tossed out Governor Mitchell-Terena. Pio Pico is now the political governor of California. Castro is the military governor of California. And the capital of California is in Monterey. But Pio Pico likes Los Angeles, so he's moved the capital down to Los Angeles. And that's caused both of them great friction to have Pico here and Castro there. And they are always constantly yelling insults back and forth to each other, which doesn't resolve the situation much. So while they're bickering in California and things are going on, the summer of 1845, in June of 1845, Fremont takes off with his third expedition, and they're going to map the source of the Arkansas River. And upon reaching their destinations in the eastern side of the Rocky Mountains, and you can see, if I drew a nice little picture there, you can see just about the mountain range where their little trail ends. And then they cross the mountains. Oh, so they were supposed to stop there and just do the Arkansas River. And at that point, though, Fremont keeps on going, which is no surprise to his expedition. Theodore Talbot, that we met earlier, Theodore Talbot had already written to his family, "We intend to winter in California." So although on face value they were supposed to just map this river, They all knew in advance that they were going beyond that river and into California. So following the red line into Nevada, you can see a green line that takes off. And that's where Talbot and another gentleman named Walker, from whom we have the Walker Pass, they take off and they hit into Southern California for the winter. Fremont continues into California on the red line and goes to Sutter's Fort. And at Sutter's Fort, he then heads over to the capital, to Monterey, to talk to the American consul, Thomas Larkin, and says, I need money for animals and provisions for my men. General Castro, who's in Monterey, hears that there's a U.S. Army group in California and with no permission from anybody, and so he's rather upset. So he calls Fremont in, and Fremont says, hey, I'm just with the Topographical Corps. I'm an officer of the U.S. Army. All these other guys are people that I have recruited. They're trappers, they're explorers, they're frontiermen. So they're not an army, it's just me. And we're looking at the bequest of my government to find a safe passage to the Pacific Ocean. Castro says, all right, get supplies for your men and be gone. And Fremont says, yeah, we're headed from here back up to Oregon. Instead, Fremont heads back to Santa Clara, or San Jose below Santa Clara, and that's where he has met up with his friends Talbot that had gone to Southern California. And you wonder, how did these guys find each other? There's no telephones, no internet. Talbot and Walker and a bunch of the men have gone to Southern California. They head up after the winter to try and find Fremont. So they're wandering around California. He's somewhere up there. That's a lot of somewhere to cover. But somehow they all connect at San Jose. And from San Jose, now that they're all together, Fremont takes the most direct northerly route to Oregon by heading east and going to where's the banana slug? Which city is that on the coast? Santa Cruz, thank you. So there's so many Santas involved, I start to get confused. So they go to Santa Cruz, which is not north, and Castro gets furious about that and says, what are you doing? You're supposed to be out of here. Fremont instead retreats, and on our little note there you see San Juan Bautista and a place called Gavilan Peak, which is hawk in Spanish. And Fremont goes to the top of this peak, builds an embankment, and puts up the American flag on California soil. This does not go over well with General Castro. He soon has 200 men surrounding the hill, and they're telling Fremont to leave, and Fremont's being defiant. And then in the middle of the night, Fremont and his men sneak out and head back up to Sutter's Fort and the Sacramento River and head towards Oregon. But kind of, what do you think? Sticking the flag up there right in their faces. That's Fremont. Meanwhile, back in Washington, D.C., it's November 1845, 5 months after Fremont had left Missouri. President James Polk calls a young Marine into his office named Archibald Gillespie, ka-ching, street name. And Archibald Gillespie is a member of the Marine Corps. Polk calls him into his office and says, I have a job for you. Your disguise is you are a salesman in ill health and you're heading to the west coast of America to gain your health again. And so your job is to go through Mexico, gather all the information you can, and come out at Veracruz on the other side, and then get to Thomas Larkin, the U.S. consul in Monterey. So Gillespie does so, crosses Mexico. At Veracruz, he gets on a ship that takes him to Hawaii. The Hawaiian ship then brings him to San Francisco, or rather into Monterey. And so he's under disguise as an American salesman with ill health, hoping to get better health. Angustias de la Guerra Ord, the daughter of our own Don Jose de la Guerra Dobie, she lives up in Monterey, and she said, his disguise was horrible. We all wondered, why would a sole American ill health salesman be brought by an American man of war from Hawaii to Monterey, the only passenger on board? And then, of course, on board the ship are all the latest newspapers from Hawaii, one of which says, Lieutenant Archibald H. Gillespie has arrived in Hawaii, so they all know that he's a Marine officer, so much for disguises. So he discusses in Monterey, he runs into Larkin and talks with Larkin, and then Gillespie says, where is Fremont? So you wonder, what does he know about Fremont being out here? And he says, well, he's headed up, Larkin says, Fremont is headed up to Oregon. So Gillespie takes off and heads up trying to find Fremont. So here again we have the entire West Coast, and this guy's searching for 45 guys wandering around up the Sacramento River. So Gillespie gets to Sutter's Fort, and then he heads up on our red line up to the Oregon Territory at Klamath Lake, where he finds Fremont. He talks to Fremont, and whatever he said is not recorded, but they headed back down immediately towards Sutter's Fort. And by June 1st, it's been a month now, Fremont is back at Sutter's Fort, and from there they head over to Sonoma, because in Sonoma, in June 14th, the Bear flag was raised at Sonoma, and California is declared a republic. The Californians, Pico's government in Castro has not recognized this, of course, but this is a bunch of disgruntled people that have said California's got to go one way or the other, and so we're going to be a separate republic. In fact, things were so bad in California. Crime was rampant. There was no money. The legislature was completely impotent, and basically it was the same as California today, except the women had real breasts. So that's the best. So the leading families knew that California was lost, that Mexico had not been a great boss of us. And so they knew that it was either going to be an independent republic like Texas, it was going to be under the control of the British, or under the control of the Americans. And so those were the three options for California. So there were many Californios who, when the Bear Flag Republic was declared, said, fine, cool, let's just do something, whatever it is, and let's all do it together. A few weeks later, on July 4th, Fremont arrives in Sonoma, and there, along with the Bear Flaggers, Fremont's men, and some Navy men that were in from Monterey, they now had the Bear Flag Republic officially declared, and they made Fremont Captain Number 1. He was Oso Number 1, Bearer Number 1, and Gillespie Bearer Number 2. And they organize a battalion with rifles and men, and they have nowhere to go or nothing to do, but they're organized, and they have guns, and they have people. Well, Castro and Pico were about to march against each other at this time. They were going to settle their differences and just hammer it out. And they instead realized that there's a problem here with these Americans coming in, the Bear Flaggers coming in. And so they sort of had a parlay to see, what we're going to do about it. Should we raise men? And they headed down towards Los Angeles. At this time, Pico came into Santa Barbara, and it was here, and this adobe was the last official capital of the Mexican rule over California. So Pico lived right here where you are sitting and signed various decrees while he was here before he moved on down to Los Angeles. Fremont, it's almost like watching a yo-yo bounce, as he was back from Sutter's Fort to Monterey to San Francisco to Sonoma, back again. But finally he boarded a ship with his men. They headed down to San Diego, where they took over the city and raised the American flag. From there they marched to Los Angeles, took that town over, and there was really no opposition. Nobody really cared. They just said, great, whatever. However, they left Gillespie in charge of Los Angeles, and Gillespie was a little strict for the Los Angeles people, who were pretty used to doing things as they felt like. He had a curfew. You could not go out after dusk. You could not have alcoholic beverages. Are you kidding me? This is California. And no public meetings or greetings without his permission. And so they formerly happily inhabitants of Los Angeles then rose together, and along with General Flores, who had come up from the interior, they threw Gillespie out. And when they threw him out, what they simply said was, you're outnumbered, give up. There's a naval ship down in San Pedro, U.S. Navy ship at San Pedro. Go on the boat and leave, and promise not to come back. And so that was the thing. People had promises. They called it their parole. So you don't break your parole. You keep your promise, handshake spoken. Gillespie says, great, I'm out of here. Bing. So he and his men leave. They leave Los Angeles. Fremont, having left Los Angeles, came up to Santa Barbara. And in Santa Barbara, he left Lieutenant Talbot that we've met. He leaves Talbot and 10 men at the Santa Barbara Presidio. No problem. Everybody says, great, welcome aboard. The young girls seem to love Talbot and his men, so that's always a bonus for the new people coming into Santa Barbara. So they're here for a little while, and then General Flores and his men, having taken Los Angeles, decide to take Santa Barbara back. So they come up, and they camp by the salt pond, which is now the bird refuge, and they tell Talbot, you got to surrender. We're here. We outnumber you about 10 to 1. So Talbot thinks about it, but his men all say, we're not going to surrender. So with the help of the señoritas, according to legend, we know the legends are the best, according to the legends, the señoritas gave them the secret way out of Santa Barbara, which is hard to do because you can see it's an open plain from the Presidio. You can be seen in every single direction. But under cover of darkness, they sneak out of the Presidio and head into Mission Canyon, and they hide up at the Mission Dam in what is now the Botanic Garden. Upon discovery, the Flores and his trackers find them in Mission Canyon, and there's a few shots exchanged back and forth of no consequence. Nobody really wants to shoot anybody, they just are warning shots. But then the Californians decide to set fire to the hillside to drive out Talbot and his men. So they light the hillside on fire. Talbot and his men find an old Indian trail that leads them over the mountains back into the Santa Ynez, and at the San Marcos Rancho, they find an Indian guide that takes them up and out of future Santa Barbara County, and it takes them a month to get up to San Juan Bautista to run into Fremont. And Talbot wrote about this adventure of nearly 6 weeks traveling by foot to San Juan Bautista. He said, I had suffered more from downright starvation, cold, nakedness, and every sort of privation than in any other trip I have ever made, and I have had some rough ones. So it was pretty hard travel for them. Well, up in San Juan Bautista now, with Gillespie kicked out of Los Angeles, Talbot kicked out of Santa Barbara, Fremont says, okay, it's reckoning time. We are going to get this battalion gathered together. We're going to go to Southern California, take back Santa Barbara, take San Luis Obispo. We're going to now just make sure everybody's on our side. So he starts gathering men and starts gathering armament. And here's the cannon. Now, where there's always talk about Fremont's cannon, that when he crossed San Marcos Pass, he lost cannon, and people have been finding cannon bits and parts for centuries. And so there were 3 cannons, and I have examples. I don't have any pictures of them, so I have examples. So it's not just that he has a cannon. To have a cannon, you have to have all the pieces that go with it, the ramrods, the gunpowder, the shot, and so that takes a wagon. So there's 3 cannons being towed by horses. There's also a wagon towed by 2 or 4 horses, and carrying all this. There's 500 pounds of gunpowder. How would you like to be driving a wagon over these rough roads with 500 pounds of gunpowder and a ton of the shot that goes into the cannons? So they build up, and now they've got 400 men, and they're about to leave San Juan Bautista. To his credit, Fremont tells the American commanders in Northern California that leave the Californians alone. Everybody up here is on our side. They're good people. There's no problem, so just let it go. And so they head off. Now here's Fremont, and he's described, he is dressed in a sailor's blue flannel shirt with a star in each corner of the broad collar, a broad-brimmed, low-crowned hat, and pantaloons tucked into his boots. He has 5 Delaware Indians as his personal bodyguard. As for the men, I think it was Bryant that wrote, there is little of the pomp and circumstance of glorious war. There's no plumes, no helmets, coats of broadcloth with buttons and lace, a broad-brimmed, low-crowned hat, shirts of blue flannel or buckskin with pantaloons and moccasins of the same, all generally the worse for wear and smeared with mud and dust. That makes up the costume of our party, officers as well as men. A leather girdle surrounds the waist from which is suspended a bowie knife and a hunter's knife, and sometimes a brace of pistols. A single bugle, and a sorry one it is, comprises our band. War, stripped of its pageantry, possesses few of the attractions with which poetry and painting have embellished it. And that just, what a beautiful picture. So Fremont leaves San Juan Bautista, headed to Southern California. It's an easy trail. All he's got to do is go from San Juan over to Monterey, follow the Salinas River to where it breaks off, go to San Luis Obispo, head down the coast, Santa Barbara, Los Angeles. Done. But this is Fremont. He seems to always want to take the hardest way to do anything. So the red dot there in the left corner is San Juan Bautista. On the right side, directly across from it, 19 miles away, is Salinas. It's an easy pass through the low mountains, or if you went up and got Highway 40, whichever that is, belong there. So there's 2 ways he could have easily gotten to Salinas. Instead, he's going to go straight down that mountain range on the far side of the Gavilan Mountains He's going to go 15 miles to the Cienega Valley, which is the red dot at the very top there, and then to the right from the Cienega Valley to Thompson's Valley, instead of doing the easy thing. So he does that, and it takes them 3 days to get through all that, and they have to take the wagons apart. They have to take the cannons apart. But this is Fremont. So now they finally get over to by Gonzales or Chualar, and they are now heading down, but they don't go along the Salinas River, which is the easiest way to do. That's where the trails are. Instead, Fremont insists on going off-road, thinking that all of the spies of the enemy are watching us. Fremont has 400 men. They are stretched out over 4 miles. When the first group starts to leave camp at 8 o'clock, it's noon by the time the last group leaves camp. That's how long it takes for these guys to eat, get packed, and get moved, and get stretched out. So nobody is surprised that Fremont is coming down. No matter what road he takes, it's obvious. But here's his 400 men, and there was a great description of them with Fremont at the lead, followed by his Delaware Indian Guards, Walla Walla Indians from Oregon, Sacramento Indians, Frenchmen, Germans, Englishmen, Canadians, Californians, and every section of the USA. And when the guys are going by, they said the ground and they also have 1,900 horses and 300 cattle, so they got to feed the guys. They butcher several cattle a day, and that's mostly what these guys are eating. But one of the biggest problems that they're having is because it's the fall. They have just recently had some torrential rains, and so the grass is now very wet, it's decaying, and the new grass coming up is not full of nutrients yet. So for the horses and animals, this is a problem, because it's one thing to feed the guys, but your animals have to feed. And the first animals go through, eat whatever there is, the next group of animals have to go further out to find stuff. And so one of the guys said, you can follow our trail by the animals that we're leaving behind. They're just too weak to carry our loads, and so we're just really easy to follow. Well, on December 14th, after 7 days of travel through California, they cross the Cuesta Pass above San Luis Obispo. It's pouring rain, and they descend upon the town. There's a big party going on at one of the barns in town, and they surround that, and they capture a bunch of the leading Californios, including the alcalde of San Luis Obispo, which is Jose de Jesus Pico, who is a nephew or a cousin of our governor, Pio Pico. So they capture him, and he has broken his parole because he had promised not to do anything against the Americans, but they had found that he had some notes that he had sent off, and so they discovered that he was sending troop movements and other things going on where people were. So Fremont was unhappy about that. Fremont and his men took up their lodging at the Mission San Luis Obispo, and so the morning that Pio Pico, or Jose de Jesus Pico, is brought before Fremont, who says, dude, you broke your parole, and you've been sending secret messages, and so we have to kill you. Punishment is death. And as this is being pronounced, suddenly there's a knock on the door. Edwin Bryant wrote, "As I was standing outside, through the corridor of the mission came a procession of females. They passed by me, headed by a lady of fine appearance and dressed with remarkable taste and neatness. Others had their faces covered, but this woman did not, this one beautiful woman. She knocks on the door and demands audience with Fremont. And he's going, I'm in the middle of killing somebody, what? And so he grants her the audience, and she comes in, and her name is Dona Ramona Carrillo de Pacheco de Wilson, and she's a Carrillo girl. She married into the Pacheco family, and then upon her husband's death, the Wilson family. She speaks for the family of Jose de Jesus Pico. She said, Fremont, why do you want to kill this man and leave a grieving widow and 10 orphan children? Who is going to take care of them? How will this happen? Why not show leniency, spare this man's life? You will have the gratitude of this community, and all will be your friends. And Fremont thinks about it, and she spoke so eloquently, he said, okay, you're right. And from that point on, Jose de Jesus Pico rode side by side with Fremont as he went through California. Now, I also note that, Fremont's wife, Jessie Benton, was a very strong woman. And I think that when Fremont met strong women, he listened to them, because he knew sometimes, as vainglorious as he was rumored to be, that sometimes there's a wiser voice in the room. And so he listened to her, and it turned out for the best. Now Pico's riding with his side as, oh, here we go. Here's the stunning picture showing Jesus now kneeling at Fremont's leg, and everybody thanking him and holding his hand. So that worked out fine for Fremont, worked out really great for Pico and his family. So they're now heading down to Santa Barbara. They leave San Luis Obispo through the Los Osos Valley, and as they get close to the coast, Campbell writes that you could tell the sailors that were with us, because when we were within 3 miles of the ocean, they could smell the salt water, and they knew didn't have to have the scouts tell us. They knew that we were close to the Pacific. So they spent a few more days, and they got down to Nipomo, where William Goodwin Dana had his 37,000-acre Nipomo ranch. And they arrived there, and Dana and all these other guys that they're running across all want to remain neutral, but they don't want to not help them, nor do they want to be favorable. So Dana sold them horses, and he sold them some cattle and fed Fremont's men while he was camped there overnight. William Goodwin Dana had married Maria Josepha Carrillo of the Carrillo family of Santa Barbara, and the relations thereof, one of the most powerful families in California. And Bryant writes, our host had married a California woman who, though the mother of 11 children, is still handsome. She was 35 years old at the time. He has fine property and a beautiful daughter. And so that's the observation of Bryant towards his hosts, the Danas. So they left Dana's place, and now they were heading down to 25 miles. There's a green dot at the top for Dana's place, 25 miles along the Sisquoc River to Benjamin Foxen's place, 25 miles. And they get to Foxen's place, camp out. Fremont talks to Foxen, and according to every legend, that is where Foxen's wife had heard from a servant that there's men gathered at Gaviota ready to trap Fremont, or that she knew from a relative, or that he knew. Somebody knew that knew somebody. And so the story is that that's where Foxen told Fremont about the trap. No, didn't happen. But nevertheless, so they camp there, they eat there, and then they leave Foxen's rancho. And on our map here, we can see Foxen up there in the green below the river. And they head from there down through the Rancho Zaca and down through several others to Mission Santa Ynez. Legend, when they got to Mission Santa Ynez, up comes William Foxen, who is Benjamin Foxen's son, with a message from his father saying, there's a trap at Gaviota. And so then William, the young boy, who's I think 10 or 12, leads Fremont over to the San Marcos Pass. Legend. So here's where he is. At the bottom in yellow is the Mission Santa Ynez, and there's 2 ways that Fremont can actually go. There's the Refugio Pass, marked in R there on the left side, or the Gaviota Pass. The Refugio Pass is 13 miles long. Fremont knows this pass. He's been on it before. He was there just that summer. A number of his men know that pass very well. They're also familiar with the Gaviota Pass. To get to the Gaviota Pass, they're going to have to go to that green arrow, or that green area above the Rancho Santa Ynez, which is the Alisal Ranch. They'll lose 2 days there playing golf before they get to the mountain range. Then they've got to head back the opposite direction to where those green dots are, to the Gaviota Pass, then back down the coast to Refugio. It's 21 miles to go to the Gaviota Pass versus the 13 miles if they had taken the Refugio Pass. So those are the obvious options in front of him. Now a bit about that Gaviota Pass. In 1883, the first county history of Santa Barbara stated that the Gaviota Pass, where Fremont was going to be trapped, was 12 to 15 miles long and easy there for the Californians to roll rocks upon them and crush and kill them. Well, of course, I measured it. The Gaviota Pass is actually only 1 mile long of steep cliffs, and so there are green arrows marking the areas. And this is what it looks like if you're up on top looking down towards the highway. Well, there wasn't a highway then, it was a narrow trail. And rolling boulders on people is not like bowling. You don't have a smooth alleyway from every landslide you've ever seen and see rocks tumble and bounce and fall. And it's not like ice curling where someone in front is sweeping away for you to make the rock go right to the target. So the idea that these guys are going to throw rocks down these cliffs and hit soldiers, and mind you, Fremont's battalion, this is a 1 mile pass, his guys are stretched out 4 to 5 miles. So how many guys can you possibly crush by throwing a few rocks and hopefully hit one as the rock tumbles down the hillside? And also the thing that nobody notices when they write about these things 20 to 30 years later is what it was actually like. It had been raining ever since they left San Luis Obispo. The Gaviota Pass this is what it looked like in the 1870s, was very narrow, and it was rushing with water, and you can see all those large boulders all piled up along there. It would have been close to impossible for Fremont's men to have crossed that and gotten down the other side. Now, in the upper right-hand side, you can see a sort of a feature. It's known as the Indian face, or the face of the man, and it's still there today at right, just above the yellow line there. So that landmark is still there. So here's our options. Fremont can take the Refugio Pass, or to the far left is what's now known as Fremont Camp on Paradise Road. So he decides that he's going to not take the Refugio Pass, certainly not the Gaviota Pass. He's going to go along the base of the coastal range there and go through the Santa Ynez Mountains and cross, guided by Benjamin Foxen or William Foxen, or the both of them. And there's another family story that says that when they were just leaving Santa Ynez, one of Foxen's men broke his leg, and Benjamin Foxen then took that gentleman back to the ranch and left his young son William to guide Fremont and his men over the pass. Now, what is not mentioned here, I did this backwards, forgive me. This picture shows the Gaviota coast, and at the left side is the Gaviota Pass, the right side Refugio Pass. So here's Neal's legend why Fremont did not choose to go along Gaviota, either the Refugio Pass and certainly not Gaviota Pass. There are 30 canyons between the Gaviota Pass and the Elwood Canyon in Goleta. 30 canyons. And each one of these canyons looks like this, and we didn't have a highway, so that meant as you came to the mouth of a canyon, there's usually a creek running through there, and it can be a drop of 20 or 30 feet down to the creek. And you can see some of the roads and dirt there marked along here, where to get past that, you had to go inland until there was a shallow place by the creek and then come back out again. If you've been to the Royal Hondo Ranch, up by the barn area, it's flat land, and you can see the old road that goes along the side of the hill that led up a quarter mile from where 101 is now. So just think, all you needed to do, if you had 100 Californios, you put 4 guys on either side of that. As the Americans come up, you start shooting at them. You're shooting straight down. If they come up to attack you, you go further up in the canyon. The rest of the guys up on the hillsides are firing down and picking off the Americans. Stretched out over 4 miles, there's like 6 or 7 canyons, easy to do this from, and they could have decimated the Americans. And Fremont, having gone through this along with his other men, certainly knew of this predicament and this possibility. So that's why I think that Fremont did not choose to go along the Gaviota frontage. So instead, he goes along the mountain range, as I said, and now at far left, we can see little tiny dots, which is the Fremont camp up along Paradise Road. From there, they're going to climb up that ridge, up into the top to Painted Cave, Laurel Springs. And they are guided by Foxen's kid. Hang on a second here. Let me get that slide. There we go. Okay. So Edward Kemble says the passage was a narrow path that had been used when the missions were in their glory, but as of many years of the late years, it had been abandoned. So it was a rough road even then. And again, they had to take the cannons and the wagons apart. It took 10 men just to carry 1 cannon up these hillsides. We found the spur more practical. This is still coming up the old Fremont Trail towards up to the top into the Painted Cave area. And they found the spur more practical for the guns. And now we had 40 extra men for the large guns. Our guide, so this is the first time one of Fremont's men has mentioned a guide. He just says, our guide says we are over the worst of it if a path of rock and timber can be called a road. And they camp, one of them says we camped at a place that had fine springs, so that would have been Laurel Springs. And that's the green tent there on the far right. And then another gentleman camped near what is now Windermere Ranch. And I have 2 P's marked there because he said there is a portal that you can pass through, the only way to get through these mountains. There's a portal, and it's about 8 to 10 feet wide. And so the one portal leads to Slippery Rock, if you've ever taken that fun excursion. Here's the other piece over here with my friend Doug Hector and John Allman, and it's a little bit wider. But Edwin Bryant wrote that the rock is soft sandstone, and there's a beautiful wall from which there is a single pass or gateway through it. And when we went through, with the spyglass, we could see Santa Barbara and herds of cattle grazing upon it, and the plain is dotted with groves surrounding the springs and being the small water courses, of which there are many flowing from this range of mountains. Ranchos up and down, but not one human being could be seen. Beyond is the Pacific and large waste of waters, a more lovely and picturesque landscape I have never before seen. Someday, there will be much more to discover about this town that will make it of far more importance than it is today. And I forgot one important thing to read because I don't have it memorized, it's too much. When Fremont decided that they were not going to take the main road, which is along Gaviota Seashore, whichever, Refugio or Gaviota, when he said we're going to go further down and cross the mountain range below, Kemble, my favorite guy, he's so sarcastic, he says, we're 13 leagues from Santa Barbara, but Fremont intends taking one of his damn shortcuts, which will be fagging to the men and death to our animals. It is said to be Fremont's intention to baffle the enemy, who is supposed to still hold possession of Santa Barbara, by a flank movement, crossing the mountains above the town while they watch for us by the main road. And so by sweeping along the seashore, we'll surprise them. This, to be sure, was about what we had been doing ever since our battalion marched southward. However, our enemy, having no knowledge of the requirements of military strategy, have failed to be survived. It was so absurd that it dropped below the criticism at our campfires. Everybody knew we were wasting our time in roundabout marches wearing out our animals. However, the surprise maggot in our leader's brain was about to hatch again, and we lighted our campfires at Santa Ynez and killed the last of our lean beeves. I just love that, the surprise maggot in our leader's head. On the one hand, they really loved Fremont. On the other hand, they were very openly critical of that. So now, Christmas Day, Christmas Eve, they're about to come down the mountains and into the plain of Goleta. And as they did, a huge storm came up. As we mentioned, it's been raining all this time, but this was a giant storm coming up. And it just poured. It was so bad that they mentioned that our guide has lost his way, but he was with all the cannons backing them up. They couldn't return because the cannons were blocking their way. So they had to push all the cannon off to the side, get everybody past them, and try to climb down these hillsides. So you can see at the top there where I've marked the P and the P, somewhere between in that area, they came down, and they ended up at a place called the Fremont Oak by Rancho del Ciervo at the top of Patterson Avenue, off of Patterson Avenue. It took them several hours to get across that because there's just water rushing everywhere. Every place where there's a smooth, safe pass is now a rushing torrent of water. Horses, they lost several hundred horses that were carried away by the torrents. None of the men were lost, but they were soaked and miserable. And they finally got down to this place called the Fremont Oak. And it died not too long ago, maybe 20 years ago or so. But it was up on at Rancho del Ciervo off of the top of Patterson Avenue. So Fremont and his men, who did all this to surprise the enemy, they are now camped on the plain of Goleta, covering about a mile of campgrounds with fires going, and they're going to surprise the enemy. They stayed in Goleta for 3 days before they finally came to Santa Barbara. And they marched into Santa Barbara to find out there was absolutely no soldiers here. Anybody that was a fighting man was down in Los Angeles with General Flores. And so Santa Barbara was empty. Fremont was about to impose harsh laws against Santa Barbara. He wanted, to confiscate all the weapons. Everybody's going to be in prison. This is going to be horrible what you guys have done by throwing my friend Talbot out. By the way, the women were glad to see Talbot alive and his men back again. But Fremont was going to be against the Santa Barbans for tossing Talbot out. Fremont stayed at the corner of State and De La Guerra Streets at the two-story Thompson adobe, which predates the famous Larkin adobe up in Monterey by a few months, if not 6 months. So we had the first Monterey-style adobe, just for your notes. So it's at the Thompson, well, he's headquartered at the Thompson adobe, that Don Jesus Pico, he brought Fremont word that there was a lady that wanted to speak to him, and he would do Fremont well to talk to her. And Fremont said, well, I'll give her 10 minutes. And Fremont wrote in his autobiography that Pico told me that she was a woman of some age, highly respected and having a strong connection over which she had influence according to a woman of high character and strong individuality within the town of Santa Barbara. Her name was Bernarda Ruiz. And in the interview, I found that her object was to use her influence to put an end to this war and to do so upon just and friendly terms of compromise that would make peace acceptable and enduring. And she wished me to take into my mind this plan of settlement to which she would influence her people. In the meantime, she urged me to hold my hand as far as possible. Naturally, her character and sound reasoning had its influence with me, and I assured her I would bear her wishes in mind to act when the occasion came, and she might with all confidence speak on this basis with her friends. And once again, a powerful woman like his wife, like Ms. Pacheco de Wilson, spoke to Fremont, and he listened. Fremont carried this advice with him as he headed now down to Los Angeles, where he met with the leader of the California forces, a gentleman named Andres Pico, brother of Pio Pico, cousin of Jose de Jesus Pico. And so Fremont camped at the Cahuenga Pass, went to Pico's camp, Andres Pico's camp. Everybody was cordial, nobody shot at anybody, they shook hands, they agreed to meet the next day, and the Treaty of Cahuenga was then signed by all the different parties. The Treaty of Cahuenga is said to be the most peaceful and merciful surrender surrender option ever given to an enemy. Fremont said, everybody in California is now an American citizen. If you don't want to be, you don't have to be. If you want to go to Mexico, go to Mexico. We're not going to charge you, look for you, seek you down. All men may keep their weapons because they need to protect their families. They need to hunt. So keep your weapons and we're done. I can't imagine any other country ever putting something together like that. And so thanks to Bernardo Ruiz, that was the information given to Fremont, and he carried it forward. And plus, everybody knew Bernardo Ruiz, too. I'm sure that Jose de Jesus Pico told his cousin Andres Pico that, yeah, Bernardo was talking to him. And so there we go. Happy days ahead for California. Now, did Foxen guide Fremont? So I started to find, where was this first recorded? The earliest recording of Foxen guiding Fremont was in 1871 from a newspaper in California, and all it said was that Foxen rendered efficient service as a scout for Colonel Fremont in 1846. In 1937, Mrs. Foxen credited telling her husband of the trap at Gaviota, and so she takes the credit there. And another one in the Fremont biography done by his granddaughter, they mentioned that Foxen was supposed to be neutral, but one of the ranch hands had told Mrs. Foxen, who then told Mr. Foxen, who then told Fremont. But firsthand, 1871 is the first time in print that I see that happen. Foxen died in 1874. He was in great health, but he took a nap on his ranch in the weeds, and a spider crawled up his sleeve and bit him, and he died not long afterwards. In the obituaries that were written about him, this great Santa Barbaran, there was nothing mentioned at all about him scouting for Fremont or the Gaviota Pass incident. So that was not even important enough, or just not a strong enough legend yet. This gentleman here, Augustine Janssens, had a huge ranch just below the Santa Ynez Mission. He was also very neutral about the situation, but he was also carrying messages back and forth between the Californios and other California ranches. So he was up to his eyeballs in all of this. And in 1878, he was interviewed by people for the Bangkok History Project. And in 1878, he said that the guide was a brother-in-law of the Oliveira family named Romero. And so he showed them where the mountain trail was. And what he said, this is the first time now where I see something about Gaviota. In 1878, in this memoir that he wrote, he said, I don't know why Pico and Covarrubias, another gentleman that was with Fremont, two local guys, had not told Fremont that he should go through the Gaviota Pass, because there a battalion of Californios could have taken the cannon. Nothing about rolling rocks, nothing about anything else, just taking the cannon. And so there's that potential. And now I have the absolute true story of what happened. So there's the narrow Gaviota Pass. Fremont scouts had gone ahead to make sure which way they were going to go. And they came into the Gaviota Pass and the narrow road and the creeks. They crossed it, and as they headed to that boulder just in the far end of that picture, they found this sign. And I can see you can all read Spanish. It says, "Rest area closed." And Fremont said, to heck with that, we're going to the Cold Spring Tavern and Paradise store, we're out of here. And that's how it happened. And so, thank you very much.